Thank you very much, Greg, for a splendid discussion. Who has raised the hand? You would like to say something, please? Rocco, and then Peter.
And thank you also for having quoted Taparelli da Zeglio. He comes from Torino. I have been for a long while a student in high school with the name D'Azeglio, but not him, his brother. Anyway, you have taken the problem from a very broad point of view. What do you think of the European experience? We have the experience of a continental organization attempting to create friendship among nations. Is the continental dimension one important step in the process of the constitution of a friendship of nations? Not by chance. In the European rhetorics, you find the expression family of nations that have common cultural roots and that have been compelled by God and destiny to be either the best friends of the world or the worst enemies, because they are in such a close contact with one another that either they are hereditary enemies, France and Germany, Italy and Austria and so forth, or they must become the best friends of the world. Don't we have to consider this continental dimension in the historical development of the friendship of nations?
Yeah, I think absolutely. In fact, the Nobel Committee awarded the Peace Prize to the European Union precisely on grounds that it was promoting friendship between nations, this idea of fraternity. So I think it's extremely valuable. And, you know, it's easy to criticize the EU as being bureaucratic, so on and so forth. But still, I think just on my experience of working within sort of projects that are funded, promoted by the European Union, it is quite a vital space for people to interact. And I think that lots of effort has been put into the Union, not for the interactions, not just to happen at the top level, but drilling down. And I didn't, you know, in my paper, I talk a little bit about how friendship is not just a normative ideal, it's something that's happening between states. And there was a study done of these exchanges between cities, mayors after the Second World War between, say, France and Germany, which had real profound city exchanges, but the mayors. And so this had put some profound effects. Yeah. And, you know, I also, if I'd had more time, I would have talked about the Nordic states, because one of the characteristics of a friendly interaction between states is that war has is unthinkable. You don't even consider it as a possibility for resolving a stubborn conflict. The Nordics never do. So I think that these models of, well, like European Union states after the Second World War, the Nordic states, we could multiply. We need to study them and understand what the dynamics are, these friendship dynamics, how they work, what makes them work, and so forth.
Yeah, since we are expecting Prime Minister Draghi in every minute, I would ask everyone to be very short in the question, and also, Greg, if possible, to be more brief in your answers. The next is Peter, and I would say let's take who? Marcelo was before Peter. What?
Very much for your paper. My question is quite short. In our times, we are discussing whether we are speaking better of states than of nations, because I would say nation, national state is a concept of the 19th century, and perhaps we have more states. What do you think? What should be the definition of nation in modern time? And perhaps we could say a little bit like provocation, the state of the future is like Switzerland, a confederation, because we have the problem of Catalonia in Spain. Spain is not a nation. Switzerland, for sure, is not a nation, it's a confederation. Scotland and England, is England or Great Britain a nation? So what is the definition, the right definition for nation for the future?
So that we save some time. Riccardo, you were next.
Yes, well, thank you for the reference to Taparelli d'Azeglio. I'm in charge of editing a reference work on the history of philosophy in Italy in the 19th century, Überwegsgründung der Geschichte der Philosophie, and I can tell you that he plays a major role, so we are going to reevaluate him. I was a bit puzzled by two quotes you make, one on Taparelli, ethnarchy, and the one when you say that nations, according to Maritain, have personal, moral personhood. And when you say, this is what today is fake identity. Now, if we have that, how can we work towards a global context of migration?
Okay, so the first question, I think there's a conceptual distinction between state and nations. Fortunately, I don't have much time, so I'm not going to attempt a definition. What I would like to say is that whereas we can there are some nations that are not states. When we talk about states, it's important to realize that they're also nations. So nation, there's a more effective side, something that speaks to our emotions and our sort of aspirations and so forth. State has a more formal kind of connotation, but we have to realize that in most political entities that are relevant to this talk, they're both nations and states that are also nations. I have to leave it at that. And I think Martin's idea that I mentioned in the paper of sort of moral personhood of states is the idea that a nation state is something more than the collection of the individuals in it. That's really what he's trying to drive at. And but when you say that, I don't see any reason why that would be, lead to an exclusion of sort of openness to migrants. I mean, that's sort of Taparelli's idea of benevolence that's owed, and the idea of a kind of international commons. So I'll leave it at that.
And Minarat, I would again ask to be very brief and Greg, please.
Thank you very much. I really like the paper and agree with the concepts. I would just suggest also that the realist school, so-called, of international relations is basically an Anglo-Saxon school of thought that draws on Hobbesian notions, which have monadic assumptions of individuals as well as states. So it's not so much, I think, that the state is sui generis, but that the theory, we have Prime Minister, well,